So one of the questions was, what percentage of time do you spend explaining vocabulary to students? I quite like the students to clarify vocabulary for each other. So if somebody said, "You, what does mean?" Some word, then I'd give it back to the students. Does anybody here know what it means? Or if they're working on a reading text and they've got some words that they're unclear on, I might say, well, sort of like, look at the text, look at the context, see if you can work out what the word means, deduce it from the context. So I don't spend a lot of time actually explaining vocabulary because I like to try to clarify it where I can. And 9 times out of 10, the students know the majority of the vocabulary, just a few bits and pieces that need filling in, especially with sort of like higher level students. Would you agree, Yasmin?
Yeah, totally, Mari. Yeah. And I think like Gabby said as well, yeah, we all fall into the trap of explaining, but there is a big difference between clarification and explanation, where clarification, like you said, Mari, it comes a lot from students' participation, like, students peer teaching, or you asking them questions and involving them, while the term explanation is really teacher-led. And yeah, we have to stop ourselves. Like Gabby said, yeah, you're right, Gabby. But sometimes I even count to 10 and I think, okay, I need to step back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Don't say it, let them say it. And you do that, don't you? We all do.
We all do. We all do. Yeah? Because the temptation is to just launch right in there and give them a definition or an explanation of the word.
Yeah.
So trying to find ways to make it a bit more memorable, actually get them to think.
Yeah, the more they think, Mari, like I think you mentioned it in the chat, the more you're letting them think cognitively. And that thinking time, that peer teaching time, and all of that is just will make it more and more memorable. So yeah.
So
And
I was just sorry, yes, carry on.
Yeah, I think there was another question, Mari, about teaching higher levels, if you want to. Do you see the question? So it was about higher level students and higher levels at, like, I think Gabby mentioned generally higher level students. Another candidate mentioned B1 upwards, like above. And how much time do we spend contextualizing, or is it as easy to contextualize the new vocabulary in higher level, and how do we do it?
I think quite often at higher levels, I use texts more often for contextualizing the language, listening texts and reading texts. If it's a listening text, obviously they need to know sort of like what the word sounds like as well as what the word looks like, but it's more about what the word sounds like and then sort of try to work out the meaning from the listening text. For the reading text, again, sort of like, deducing meaning from context, hopefully. Because I know somebody mentioned that a lot of the words at higher level are more abstract. So, flashcards don't work. Yeah. So having some sort of reading or listening text where they can work out the meaning, sort of like deduce meaning from context, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes.
But I mean, you're working in the university context, and so a lot of your students are higher level students, and you're dealing with you're dealing with more specific topics, aren't you?
So sometimes it's academic English, sometimes it's ESP English. So and like Gabby was mentioning something about how much time do we spend on contextualizing and going through the words and all of that. But like what you said, Mari, so at university level and more academic or ESP courses, sometimes, you might want to give them a list of words that they are specific to that course, that semester, and we do that at the place that I teach at Qatar University. And for example, we teach English for law, English for business, and there are certain terms that we need them to know. And even in general English and English for law, they mean different things. So the same word might have two different meanings. So as a result, we sometimes find it easier to give them the list of the words with their translation. I know it goes a bit against a lot of teachers, a lot of teacher trainers belief that we don't believe in translation. Yeah, we don't do it. You're absolutely right. But with certain contexts, with certain context of students and context of teaching, you might want to think about, yeah, this is a good way. As long as, I suppose this is what we do at Qatar University, where we do provide them with the translation, but then they take the words, they learn them, and they put them into practice in a project. For example, like a moot court, like defending their business idea in front of a few judges. So they have to use their words. It's not just that we give them the list and translation and it ends there, but also it's got continuation of using the language within the context.
So these words are very, very specific, aren't they? And so they're only relevant to that particular their field of study or their field of work. And
yeah.
so from that point of view, just giving them the glossary with the words and the translations is a much more efficient and effective way
Yeah.
of dealing with those technical words.
And possibly designing the course in a way that, knowing you're going to give those words to them, you're going to think about how and where they would use it. Are they going to do a reading with using those words, and then maybe following that it would be some production, some project, something like that. So it would be, when designing the course, you would make sure that there are all other elements that the words will appear over and over again throughout the
Right.
course.
So they're revisiting them time and time again. Just as a message here, talking about higher level students, dealing with language with higher level students often involves dealing with emergent language, and I think that's true, isn't it? They're trying to express something. And they express it correctly, but there are sort of like more creative ways of expressing it, or sort of like more sort of like slightly more sort of like English ways of expressing it. And so sort of like getting them, you're filling in those gaps that they have.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, the usage is everything. Like I think Gabby has mentioned this as well. Yeah, the usage is everything. It's a confirmation for them that they have, achieved and it's not only once using it, that doesn't mean anything. I suppose using it there and then using it again in the actual natural environment, in the real world,
Spontaneously. Yeah.
spontaneously, when they can actually bring it up again and use it, that's when it's achieved.
Yeah. It's lovely when you hear, the students coming out with these things that are just so, on point. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And
So what else? Yeah, it's just sort of catching that moment when the students don't quite get something right, and then correcting it. Yeah.
yeah. And I think something else that it was again in the same comment above, that two people mentioned, how much time we spend on higher level learners, how much time we spend on clarifying the context and therefore the vocabulary. It becomes a little bit, okay, they feel like it's time consuming to do that. Like, to maybe go through one piece of vocab, contextualize it, and then, the rest, which we talked a little bit about it. But also, I think it's with the context, the vocabulary goes, the level goes higher and higher, and the context is the same. So a context like environmental problems or anything like that would bring the key vocab of its own nature.
Yeah.
And therefore
Yeah.
you don't have to clarify one word within that context. You're still looking at a group of words that are related to the same context. And the
And
nature of the
also
context.
people coming to the lesson all come with their own experience. And so students teach each other because they share vocabulary. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So there's a question, do you have a preferred way of clarifying meaning? It depends very much on the level of the students, I think. You know, at very low levels, I like to use lots of visuals.
Yeah.
Because it makes things more memorable. Yeah. Flashcards or board drawings or different things. At higher levels, I quite like using a kind of teach test method. So I give the students an exercise to do with the vocabulary to see what they know about it. And then as they're comparing their answers, I try to find out where the gaps are. So what do I need to focus on? And then in the teach stage, I sort of like fill in the gaps, do some concept checking, clarify the form, clarify the meaning, the pronunciation, or so on, and then give them another little test to do to find out if they now have moved forward a little bit with their understanding of that vocabulary. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree, Mari. Yeah. I think the clarification of vocabulary or function or grammar or anything like that is just quite an important part of the lesson, and we underestimate it, but we do need to spend time on it. And very often we think maybe we're spending too much time on it, but in fact that time that students are, that we are clarifying that target language, whether it's vocab or grammar, we shouldn't really be stopping until we are absolutely sure that it is clear in their head. And even before we get to the actual word, or before we get to the form, before we get to the actual target language, I think we need to make sure everybody in class is crystal clear about that function. They have matched it with something either in their first language, or they've matched it in their head with something, and then move on, like what you said, Mari, to
But then with vocabulary, you know, it's often I see initial teacher trainees saying students will have learned, you know, the meaning, form, and pronunciation on this vocabulary. And I say, well, wouldn't it be wonderful if that actually happened, you know?
we will.
But you need to revisit it, revisit it, revisit it. I don't know how many, I can't remember. They've done some research about how many times you need to have seen and heard and used a word before you finally assimilate it and it becomes part of your everyday repertoire.
Yes, yeah.
But, you know,
Yeah, and following,
you need to do lots
yeah,
of recycling.
yeah, following that, it's like when we clarify the vocabulary via or everything that you said in the video, visuals, context, all the great, you know, different ways of clarifying language. We do all of that, and okay, we look at the target language, and then we still follow it up with CCQs, and yet CCQs are like a we are checking their understanding, but also it's a confirmation for students to be sure that yes, they've answered this correctly. So it's like a reassurance for students to know that they've got it right, and therefore that will give them confidence to use the word later on in the, I don't know, in a production task, in the second test that Mari, you were mentioning, somewhere else. It's like, but they need that kind of reassurance before they move on to that. And that's those CCQs not only checks the understanding for us, but also gives that confidence to students to move on. And yes, I'm going to use it. I have no doubt about it. And then again, like Mari, you said practice and tests and
And
production.
that's where I was coming into practice. I mean, I don't know if anyone here has so many good ideas. Maybe you could put something in the chat. I'm just wondering what technology you can use to give students more practice. So even after you've had your class or during the class, using apps and different things to practice the vocabulary. I mean,
It
what
would be
apps do you
interesting to see
use?
if people could put it in the chat. It would be interesting to see if they use different things that what we use.
Yeah,
We've
yeah.
got like, yeah. So we've got a question here, but while people maybe are putting their ideas of how they practice vocabulary in the chat, let's have a look at this question as well. Wow, 45-minute lessons are really short to achieve, but
45 minutes. I think the thing to realize is that, you know, there's a limit to the number of words that you can cover in a lesson. And they say something like between 8 and 10 words maximum.
I
And
agree
out of
totally,
those
Mari.
8 or 10 words that you're going to teach, you can assume that they're not all new. Well, hopefully they're not all new. So, you know, you're focusing on fewer words.
Yeah.
Oh, what have we got? Quizzes with Quizlet. Oh, yes, Quizlet
Yes,
is fantastic
it's our best
because
friend.
you can use it for matching tasks and for they have little test cards as well, don't they, on Quizlet, sort of to test
Yeah.
your knowledge of the words. And the sort of fun games like the gravity game. So you have
Mm,
to sort of like match the meaning to the word or type the word in quickly before it hits the ground. Yeah.
yeah.
So
Oh,
Quizlet is excellent.
yeah, Quizzy as well is good, and I think Sharon mentioned Quizzy as well. Um, but any other maybe apps, or feel free to put it in the chat box if you're using anything. We've got a few things, Mari, don't we? We use Kahoot quite a lot. I think Kahoot is quite popular around the world at the moment. It's fun, it's engaging, it's got a competitive music even on. Um, it's quite good. Students love it. Students really like it.
It's wall wisher or something as well. It's got lots of different games, so like matching games or sort of like putting sentences in order, matching pictures to the words.
Mm.
So really good app to use. You
Yeah,
said
we
you used Socrative?
Socrates. Yeah, I quite like Socrates as well. Socrates is really good that in terms of giving feedback and looking at the answers, it's much more teacher and student friendly than Kahoot and Quizlet. It's I think it's better with giving feedback. You can go back, you look at it again with the students, the percentage they go. It's more. I know they all give a report. They all have a report at the end, but Socrative is more student friendly. It's not as fun as Kahoot or Quizlet, but it's a really good platform. We use it a lot, Socrative.
I like
Definitely.
I like doing Pelmanism, you know, where you've got cards with, you know, a picture and the words, and they need to so they put all the cards face down, words on one side and pictures on the other side, and then they turn over a picture and they have to say what the word is, and then they turn over a word, and if it's the word that matches the picture, then they get 1 point. They can keep
Yeah.
it. Yeah,
Yes. Yes.
which is great for practicing the vocabulary because
Yeah.
you have to keep.
Mari, I actually remember I had that game as a child, like, the physical cards. Of course, this is like electronic version of it. But I remember I had that and I used to play and I used to love it. So, but like any other things, nowadays everything is, we've got an e-version of everything. So that is,
Wordwall has a Pelvinism app as well, so you can make your own. Yeah.
yeah. perfect. Yeah.
And it's great for grammar as well. You turn over a picture, what does John do on Mondays? You turn over the picture and it says he plays golf, what's he doing now? Turn over another picture. Oh, he's playing football.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you can
Yeah.
do present simple versus present continuous, sort of like with that. Pelmanism works really well for matching games.
Yeah.
Other tips for 45-minute lessons? So obviously matching is quite nice for 45-minute lessons. Matching definitions to words, and then sort of teaching. If they've got some right, that's good. And then you can work out which ones they haven't got right and do a bit of teaching of that. And then they can try to use those words in different ways.
And I think for 45 minutes, possibly like you said, Mari, obviously we've got lots of approaches like text-based approach, situational approach, but they do take time. So in this case, Gabby is asking about 45 minutes. I think Mari mentioned it before as well. Test, teach, test works really well because it's got that diagnostic test at the beginning, and then it allows you not to look at the things that the students know, and you just look at the things that they don't know and teach those before you go to practice. So that will save you a little bit of time. Not only student-centered, and it's nice for students to not to go through things that they know, but it does save time, test, teach, test. So it is a good approach to use for shorter lessons, Gabby. Yeah.
I just wondered if people actually use dictionaries anymore, or if we're all using online dictionaries, because when I was first teaching, we used to have lessons where we used dictionaries to find the meanings of vocabulary. And it was really good when you were working with phrasal verbs, because they could look in the dictionary, they could find out if it was transitive or intransitive, and if it was separable or inseparable, and all sorts of things like that. But we don't, when most students now tend to use electronic dictionaries, don't they?
Yeah. I remember that, Mari, that actually when I was working in Manchester, we used to buy actually we used to ask the school to buy dictionaries, Oxford Advanced Dictionaries, and we would put them on the students' desk, and we would teach them how to use them. We would emphasize on using dictionaries, which is great. I kind of miss that study skill. It's really good. But like you said, e-dictionaries, yeah, they are quite good. Oxford Learner, online Oxford Learner, and Cambridge Online, they are still very good, reliable dictionaries.
We used to have them at different levels. So we'd have, the elementary dictionaries, then the intermediate dictionaries, and then the advanced dictionaries. And there would be obviously limited number of words for the elementary dictionaries, and there'd be more pictures and stuff as well.
I remember that. Yes, absolutely.
And then you had the picture dictionaries for the beginners, and picture dictionaries are great.
Yeah. The e-dictionaries are also good. The advantage is that they can listen to the pronunciation, and not all students know how to read the phonetics. So it's actually not bad. It's good to have e-dictionaries and students using them.
Well, you can make a link to the word as well, can't you, on your PowerPoint? So, you've got your word and you have a little button and you press it and you'll hear the word being pronounced.
Yeah. We've got a question about error correction and how do you correct errors during the lesson or after the lesson? I think Zamir is probably talking about error correction for vocabulary in specific. I think so. So, Mari, what do you think? Error correction.
If my focus is on reading skills, for example, or listening skills, and I'm feeding back on their answers and they make grammatical errors, or they don't pronounce a word correctly or whatever, we tend to just let it go, because I'm focusing on whether they've actually understood the text and have got the answers to the text, but I might make a little note so that when I get to the end of the lesson, I'll correct it. But if I'm actually working on accuracy at the time and I want them to pronounce the word correctly, then I will sort of like model and drill, and then I'll board it and show the stress and sort of like highlight any features, because often, a word like aching, for example, students might say it's atching, or a chemist, they'll say chemist. Yeah. So, and then you've also got problems with false friends. I've been working a lot with Italian students recently, and a farm in Italian is actually a factory. And a magazine is not, sort of like an illustrated, glossy thing to read about fashion and so on. A magazine is like a warehouse. And so it's kind of anticipating the problems the students are going to have with the language when you're preparing the lesson, so you're ready to deal with that if it comes up as a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, good points, Mari. Yeah, absolutely. I think with error correction, and I think with vocabulary in specific, sometimes it doesn't, or let's say it shouldn't. It would be a good idea not to stop it at error correction, because with vocabulary, we want them to use the new words. We want them to use a wider range of vocabulary. So sometimes it's when they produce a writing or speaking, it's always a good idea to ask them, like, look at the writing again and find, I don't know, 5 words that you can use better words for them. They're not necessarily wrong. There's nothing wrong with them, but perhaps you can use more academic words. You can use, because you've repeated this word in paragraph 1, you can use it a different way of saying the same thing. So it might
That's
not
a
be
really nice way of expanding their vocabulary.
Exactly.
And another thing you can think about is if they've made an error, you can make that error an opportunity to learn more. Yeah. So they might say it was a very hard wind. Yeah. And so then you can say, well, what words collocate with wind? Let's see how many we can find. It was a strong wind. It was a violent wind. It was and sort of like get the different collocations that go with that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So you can build it up. Yeah. But I think also, they're sort of dealing with emergent language. So, as they're talking, sort of like helping them, maybe slipping them sort of like little bits of paper with other vocabulary that they could use to help them in their conversation without stopping their flow, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Ihor or Ihor, I don't know how to pronounce his name, but if the message is clear, errors can be tolerated, postponing the corrective feedback closer to the end of the lesson. Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Like
I mean,
delayed
it's mutual intelligibility is what we're talking about, isn't it? If we understand each other, if we're communicating and understand each other, then, the odd slip or sort of like slightly unusual word, so long as we understand what you mean, it's fine.
Yeah, and again, like Ihor mentioned in another comment, saying it depends on the focus of the task. It's accuracy or fluency. And if it's fluency, you don't want to interrupt them, and you could do a delayed error correction. But if
Absolutely.
it's accuracy, yeah.
But what I tend to do at the end of the lesson is I have like a split screen, and I have, some good language on one side and some, things that they can improve on the other. And I kind of, I say this, so I heard this, absolutely fantastic, it's really good. And let's think of other ways of saying that as well. So even though it's good, there are still other ways you can say it, And then on the other side, there are things that, have some slips maybe the wrong preposition, or they missed out the article or subject verb agreement or something like that. And they can have a little quiz at the end, so they could work in teams and they get a point for each of the errors that they correct. And so it makes it more competitive as well.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah. I think, Mari, you said that you do that throughout the lesson, like this, making notes of their errors and putting them at the end of the class, like you just mentioned,
Exactly.
which is great. And it does it. But I think it does make a difference when you do it throughout your lesson. Like you do, I think you mentioned you do it in the leading, even like at the beginning of the lesson, and then you keep your notes, and I think you put them at the end of your lesson.
That's right.
And,
That's
and
right.
by doing that, possibly you're training your students to monitor their own speaking throughout
They
the lesson.
know that I'm going to be listening to them throughout the lesson, and I'll be making notes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
because
I
that's what
think
monitoring's about.
yeah, exactly. So once they realize, okay, Mari, my teacher is going to do that, the first lesson, second lesson, they're gonna get used to that. And when they're speaking, automatically they're gonna say, "Oh, I need to be careful because she's going to make notes." So they
Yeah, yeah.
will not be lazy speakers, because very often with speaking and students or non-native speakers generally, we fall into the habit of lazy speaking. We don't monitor ourselves. We
Well,
don't.
sometimes we're tired, though, because you've
Yeah.
been using this other language for so long. There's a message from Marianne here. I'd like to hear your opinion on the role of discussion and collaboration in clarifying words in the classroom. Nice one. Would you like to?
I don't know.
Well,
Marianne means to opinion role of discussion. Like, yeah, I think that happens throughout everything that you mentioned, Mari. Most approaches, the most methods that you mentioned in your video, they all are collaboration and discussion. I don't know if there is a question there or.
I think what I'm thinking is that we give the students a task to do to work out the meaning of vocabulary, yeah, and then they would go off and they would discuss the task and help each other, clarify the meaning of the vocabulary for each other. So that gives the teacher the opportunity just to listen to what they're saying and see which ones they're okay with and which ones they have a problem with, or which ones, the pronunciation's not quite right or something like that. So as a teacher is monitoring, it kind of informs how much feedback they have to give. But the students are teaching each other as they're collaborating and confirming whether their answers are correct or not, which builds their confidence for when you come to feedback on the task.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, in most approaches that you mentioned, there is lots and lots of either students, if it's teacher-student interaction, students are thinking, and if it's a student-student interaction, that's basically collaboration, peer teaching, thinking, everything is going on. And yeah, that's cognitively useful for students and in terms of learning vocabulary.
So, yeah, Gabby says I'm a huge advocate for banning explanations. Yeah. Negotiating meaning, yeah. But I think often students will explain words to each other. I don't mind that. Yeah, and I don't mind translation from time to time. If it's a word that is quite complex, and you're going to be standing on your head trying to get the meaning of it across. If you have a monolingual class and you know what the word is in their first language, then sometimes just a quick definition or sort of give them the word in their own language to save time.
Yeah, it can be, yeah.
Mm.
And Gabby has mentioned explanation versus again elicitation, and yes, elicitation needs, you need to be very patient. You need to ask the right questions. You need to be prepared to give them that thinking time, which requires silence. You need to be prepared to do all of that. Otherwise, elicitation can become painful for you. If you train yourself as a teacher to do all of that, be patient, give them the thinking time, let them digest, let them think, be prepared that there will be silence moments, then it will go.
Oh, I'm a great advocate of silence. I'm always harping on about silence, because teachers like to praise students, but sometimes it becomes a bit what I call rubber stamping. The student says something, the teacher says, great.
I finished.
And then another student says something, the teacher says, wonderful. Yeah. And so the teacher's filling the silence. The other students aren't listening to the person who's spoken. They're only listening to the teacher. So, yes, well done, very good, that's great. And so if you could allow the student to speak and leave that silence hanging there for the others to kind of listen to what they've said, to see if they agree or disagree, and then get some feedback from the others, it's so much more productive. I love silence in the classroom.
Yeah, absolutely. We sometimes we have to stop ourselves, but we have to. There is actually a method called silent method.
Oh, was
It's
this Caleb Gatagno, the silent way?
Yeah, it's funny to try it. It may be at least once in your teaching career. Try a silent method for half an hour and see how you can cope with it. It's actually funny how much you can get across without talking to your students. And I think that would be a good practice for stopping yourself from explaining or telling things to students.
That was very, very popular in the 70s and 80s, wasn't it? The silent way. So I used to try a bit of that myself. I still have my Cuisenaire rods, the little pieces of coloured wood that you can use for teaching silent way lessons.
Yeah.
Mhm. Which is another way of clarifying meaning, which I didn't talk about. Yeah. Because you can make timelines with the Cuisenaire rods, and you can also build little scenarios. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And Gabby's saying even when using timelines, teachers can be silent. That's true. That's true. So that the timelines speak for themselves, really.
Yeah.
One way I like to one little thing I like to do is board stories, where you draw pictures to elicit story, usually a 4-line story. Yeah. So you elicit the first line of the story, model and drill, elicit the next line of the story, model and drill, and then they have to do the first and second line together. And then you do the third line, model and drill, and then they do the first, second, and third line together. And then the fourth one, model and drill, and then the first, second, third, and fourth line together. And then they have to write the story down. And then you can use that as your context for grammar, for example. Yeah, it's a very, very simple story.
That's very interesting.
For
Yeah.
vocabulary as well.
Would you use that for the production, like at a freer task, or would you start the lesson with that, Mari, and then teach the grammar and then?
I'd have some sort of lead in. So let's say my story was about a disaster that happened on holiday. I'd have a little lead in about, what can go wrong on holiday. Yeah. And then I'd do my little board story about something that went wrong on holiday. And then they'd write it down. And then we'd sort of go through the grammar. Yeah. Sort of like circle all the past simple tenses, put a line under all the past continuous, and then you can do your timelines and everything from that. But it's a very clear way of getting your message across.
We've got something, another ear said, how about letting students chat with an AI language model? There's nothing wrong with that. But don't forget AI. can be a little bit dumb. They are not clever enough yet. There's too much
bit robotic, I
robotic.
find.
Yeah,
Yeah.
repetition. So if nothing is wrong with students using AI, but they certainly need to look at it again. They need to put their own touch in there. They need to proofread it. They need to look at the content, because the content has got a lot of repetition in it. They need to reword the words. The vocab might need changing. So they could use it as a canvas, as a base, but not for the end product. Put it that way. At least that's what we do say.
Yeah, I think that's sort of like AI dialogues. They still lack subtlety, really. I don't think they've got the empathy yet.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
there are
that's a
quite a
good
few
way.
apps where you can sort of like converse with AI.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.